At my daughter's wedding, she asked the man who abandoned her when she was 3 years old to walk her down the aisle. Not me. The man who raised her alone for 25 years. The man who worked double shifts at the fire station so she could go to law school. She chose him. So I got up from my seat in the back row, where I'd been placed like some distant relative, and I walked out of that church before the ceremony even started. But here's what my daughter didn't know. The house I'd been planning to give her as a wedding gift, the house I'd spent 30 years paying off, the house where she took her first steps and said her first words, I'd already sold it. Every penny went to the Canadian Firefighters Burn Fund. And when her biological father disappeared again 3 months after the wedding, and she came knocking on my door begging for help with her mortgage, that house was already gone. Let me tell you how I got here. My name is William, and I'm 63 years old. I spent 34 years as a firefighter in Hamilton, Ontario, working out of Station 7 on the mountain. I've pulled people from burning buildings, held the hands of dying accident victims, and watched colleagues carried out in caskets. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for the pain of watching my own daughter erase me from her life. Emma was born in the spring of 1997. Her mother, Christine, was 24, and I was 35. We'd been married for 2 years, and when they placed that tiny girl in my arms, I swore I would give her the world. I remember her eyes, these big brown eyes, looking up at me like I was the center of the universe. I promised her right then that I would always be there. Christine had other plans. When Emma was 3 years old, Christine sat me down at our kitchen table and told me she wasn't happy. She said being a firefighter's wife was too hard. The irregular hours, the worry every time I went to work, the modest salary. She'd met someone else, she said. A man named Derek who worked in finance downtown Toronto. He drove a BMW and wore suits that cost more than my monthly paycheck. I begged her to stay. Not for me, but for Emma. I told her we could work it out, go to counseling, whatever she needed. But Christine had already made up her mind. She packed her bags, kissed Emma on the forehead, and walked out the door. Here's the part that still makes my blood boil after all these years. She didn't take Emma with her. She said, and I quote, "Derek isn't ready for kids. Maybe when she's older. Maybe when she's older." Like our daughter was some inconvenient piece of furniture that didn't match her new lifestyle. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. Christine got weekend visitation rights, but she rarely used them. Once a month, maybe. Sometimes she'd go 2 or 3 months without seeing Emma at all. Derek didn't like having children around, she explained. It disrupted their social calendar. So I raised Emma alone. Do you know what it's like to be a single father working as a firefighter? Our shifts were 24 hours on, 48 hours off. On the days I worked, I had to find childcare. My mother helped when she could, God rest her soul, but she was getting older and had her own health problems. I burned through babysitters, daycare costs, and every favor I could call in from friends and family. But I made it work, because that's what you do when you're a parent. I was there for Emma's first day of kindergarten at Chidoki School. I was there when she lost her first tooth and insisted the tooth fairy leave a note. I was there for every parent-teacher conference, every school play, every soccer game in the rain. I learned to braid hair from YouTube videos. I burned 100 pancakes before I figured out the right temperature. I sat through more Disney movies than I can count, and I didn't complain once. When Emma was 8, Christine moved to Vancouver with Derek. The visits dropped to twice a year, if that. Phone calls became sporadic. Birthday cards arrived late or not at all. But every time Christine did call, every time she swooped in for a brief visit with expensive gifts and promises of trips that never happened, Emma's eyes would light up. "Mommy says maybe I can come visit her in Vancouver this summer," Emma would tell me. Summer would come and go, no visit. "Mommy says Derek is buying a boat. She says I can go sailing with them." Never happened. I watched my daughter make excuse after excuse for a mother who couldn't be bothered to show up. And I never said a bad word about Christine. Not once. I figured Emma would see the truth eventually, and I didn't want to be the bitter ex-husband poisoning his daughter against her mother. Maybe that was my first mistake. When Emma was 12, she started asking about her biological father. Not me, Derek. I explained that Derek wasn't really her father. just her mother's husband. But the seed was planted. She became curious about this mysterious man who had, in her mind, stolen her mother away. I didn't know it then, but Christine had been telling Emma stories about how wealthy they were, about their condo overlooking English Bay, about the vacations to Mexico and Hawaii. She painted a picture of this glamorous life that I, a humble firefighter in Hamilton, could never compete with. Still, I kept my mouth shut and my head down. I worked overtime whenever I could. I skipped vacations, drove a used truck, and ate a lot of frozen dinners so I could put money aside for Emma's education. By the time she finished high school, I had saved nearly $90,000 in an RESP. Emma got accepted to Western University for pre-law. I remember the day she got the acceptance letter. We sat on the front porch of our little house on the mountain, and she cried happy tears while I tried to hide my own. "I'm going to make you proud, Dad," she said. "You already have, sweetheart. You already have." Those 4 years at Western weren't cheap. Tuition, residence, books, living expenses. The RESP covered most of it, but I still had to dip into my savings more than once. I took on extra shifts, worked every holiday so younger guys could be with their families, and put off fixing the roof for another year. Emma graduated with honors. She got into Osgood Hall Law School at York University, one of the best law programs in the country. I was so proud, I thought my heart might burst. But law school was another 3 years, another $100,000. I refinanced the house I'd bought when Emma was a baby, the house where she'd grown up. I added $60,000 to my mortgage at 55 years old, knowing I'd be paying it off well into retirement. But it was worth it. It was all worth it. During her second year of law school, something changed. Emma started talking about Derek more often, calling him by his first name with a familiarity that made me uncomfortable, mentioning trips to Vancouver that I hadn't known about. "Derek has these amazing connections in the legal world," she told me over dinner one night. "He knows partners at all the big firms." "That's nice," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "He says, when I graduate, he can introduce me to people who can really help my career." I wanted to say that I'd introduced her to people too, that half the guys at Station 7 had lawyers, accountants, doctors in their families who would bend over backwards to help a firefighter's daughter. That connections weren't everything, but I just nodded and asked if she wanted more salad. That Christmas, Emma went to Vancouver instead of coming home. First time ever. She said Derek and Christine were taking her to Whistler for a ski trip, and it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. "I'll be home for New Year's, Dad," she promised. She wasn't. The calls became less frequent after that, the visits shorter. When she did come home, she seemed distracted, always checking her phone, always talking about Vancouver like it was some paradise, and Hamilton was just a pit stop. Then she met Kevin. Kevin was everything I wasn't. 28 years old, 6 feet tall, worked at a Big 5 bank downtown Toronto in their investment division. He drove a Tesla and wore watches that cost more than my truck. He was perfectly pleasant, perfectly polite, and he looked at me the way you might look at the landscaper who shows up while you're hosting a garden party. Emma was smitten. Within 6 months, they were engaged. "Isn't it exciting, Dad?" she gushed, showing me the ring. 2 carats, princess cut, enough to blind you in the right light. Kevin is so wonderful, and Derek has offered to pay for the entire wedding. There it was. Derek, the man who had never changed a diaper, never sat up with a sick child, never helped with homework, or dried tears after schoolyard heartbreaks. The man who had essentially bought my ex-wife and was now buying my daughter. "That's very generous," I managed to say. "It's going to be at the Old Mill in Toronto. 200 guests. Oh, and Derek has this friend who owns a vineyard in Niagara on the lake, and they're providing all the wine." I listened to her go on for an hour about flowers and venues and dress designers. Not once did she ask if I had any input. Not once did she mention what my role would be. Finally, I asked, "So, walking you down the aisle, I assume that's still my job?" Emma's face did something I'll never forget. It sort of froze, then melted into what I can only describe as pity. "Dad, I need to talk to you about that." My stomach dropped. Derek has been like a father to me these past few years. He's really helped me with my career, And he's paying for the wedding, and Kevin really respects him. Emma, I said quietly, Derek is not your father. I am. I know that, Dad. Biologically, yes. But Derek has been so supportive lately, and I feel like I want to honor that relationship too. Too? She took a deep breath. I'm going to have Derek walk me down the aisle, but I want you to do a reading during the ceremony. Something meaningful. A reading. 30 years of sacrifice, and I get a reading. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table and demand to know what the hell happened to my little girl, the one who used to climb into my lap and tell me I was the best daddy in the whole wide world. I wanted to ask when Derek had ever held her hand on the first day of school, when Derek had ever taught her to ride a bike, or drive a car, or tie her shoes. But I'm a firefighter. We're trained to stay calm in emergencies, to assess the situation, control our emotions, and find the best path forward. If that's what you want, I said. Her shoulders relaxed. She'd expected a fight. Thanks, Dad. I knew you'd understand. I didn't understand. Not one damn bit. But I loved my daughter, and I wasn't going to let pride destroy whatever relationship we had left. The next few months were a blur of wedding planning that I was barely included in. I got emails about my father of the bride responsibilities, which amounted to showing up to the rehearsal dinner and giving a toast that had to be approved by the wedding planner. Approved. Like I was some loose cannon who might embarrass the proceedings. I wrote a toast. I poured my heart into it, talked about the day Emma was born, the countless memories we'd shared, how proud I was of the woman she'd become. I sent it to the wedding planner. She sent it back with edits. Too long? This part might make people uncomfortable. Can you remove the references to her childhood? We want to keep things forward-looking. Forward-looking. They wanted to erase her past. My past. The history of a man who had given everything so his daughter could have a future. I rewrote the toast, stripped out the memories, the emotion, the truth, turned it into some generic corporate speech about love and partnership and best wishes for the future. The wedding planner approved it. 3 weeks before the wedding, I got a call from my buddy Ray at Station 7. He'd heard through his wife, who worked at a florist that was doing some of the arrangements, that there was assigned seating at the reception. You're at table 12, Will, he said. Okay. Is that good or bad? It's in the back, near the kitchen. Table 1 is for the wedding party. Tables 2 and 3 are for Derek and Christine's friends. I checked the seating chart. You're at a table with some of Kevin's distant cousins from Newfoundland. I thanked Ray and hung up. Then I sat in my empty house, the house I'd raised my daughter in, and I cried. The day of the wedding arrived. I put on my best suit, a navy blue number I'd bought for Emma's law school graduation. I drove to the Old Mill, this beautiful venue on the Humber River that probably cost more to rent for a day than I made in 2 months. I parked my old F-150 between Lexuses and Mercedes and walked inside. The ceremony was in the garden, white chairs arranged in perfect rows, an arbor covered in roses, a string quartet playing softly in the background. It looked like something out of a magazine. I found my seat. Row 7, far left. Not even on the aisle. Guests filed in. I didn't recognize most of them. Derek's business associates, Christine's Vancouver friends, Kevin's family. I felt like a stranger at my own daughter's wedding. Then I saw Derek. He was standing near the front, resplendent in a tailored charcoal suit, laughing with Kevin and the groomsmen, like he belonged there, like he'd earned the right to be there. Christine was next to him, looking decades younger than her actual age, thanks to what I can only assume was very expensive cosmetic work. They didn't even glance in my direction. The music changed. Everyone stood. Emma appeared at the end of the aisle. God, she was beautiful. The white dress, the flowers in her hair, that radiant smile I remembered from when she was 5 years old and had just discovered she could do a cartwheel. And Derek was standing beside her, offering his arm. I watched them walk down the aisle together. I watched Derek beam with pride, like he'd done something to deserve this moment. I watched Christine wipe tears from her eyes, putting on a show of maternal devotion that made me sick. The officiant asked, "Who gives this woman to be married?" Derek answered, "Her mother and I do. Her mother and I." "Not me, Derek." I should have walked out right then. But I stayed. I stayed because I kept hoping, even as the ceremony went on, that Emma would look at me, that she would acknowledge me somehow, give me some sign that I still mattered. She didn't. The vows were exchanged. The rings. The kiss. Everyone applauded as Kevin and Emma walked back down the aisle as husband and wife. Emma was glowing. She looked at Kevin, at Derek, at Christine, at the crowd of well-dressed strangers. She didn't look at me once. At the reception, I found my way to table 12. Ray was right. It was in the back, near the kitchen doors, which swung open every few minutes with clattering dishes and shouted orders. My table mates were nice enough, Kevin's cousins from Corner Brook, but they didn't know me from Adam. The toasts began. Derek went first. He talked about how he'd watched Emma grow into an extraordinary young woman, how proud he was to have played a small part in her journey, how he and Christine were thrilled to welcome Kevin into the family. Small part. The man had met my daughter maybe 50 times in her entire life, and he was up there taking credit for who she'd become. The crowd ate it up. Laughter, applause, raised glasses. Then it was my turn. I walked to the microphone, my approved toast in my trembling hand. I looked out at the crowd, at my daughter sitting at the head table between Kevin and Derek, and something inside me broke. I couldn't do it. I couldn't stand there and pretend that everything was fine. I couldn't deliver some sanitized, corporate-approved speech that erased 30 years of my life. So I went off script. "Emma," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "I want to tell you about a night you probably don't remember. You were 6 years old. There was a fire at the Dofasco plant, and I was on duty. I was inside the building when part of the roof collapsed. I got pinned under a beam. While I was lying there, not sure if I was going to make it out, all I could think about was you, about who would braid your hair, who would make your breakfast, who would tell you everything was going to be okay when you had a bad dream." The room had gone quiet. Emma's face was unreadable. I made it out that night. Broken collarbone, second-degree burns on my arm. But I made it out because I wasn't done being your dad. You needed me. I paused, looking at my daughter's eyes. I've spent 30 years trying to give you everything. Not the things that money can buy. I couldn't compete there. But the things that matter. Time, presence, love. I worked double shifts so you could go to Western. I refinanced my house so you could go to Osgood. I was there for every scraped knee, every broken heart, every triumph and failure. Derek was whispering something to Christine. Kevin was frowning. I wasn't invited to walk you down the aisle today. That honor went to someone else. I've been seated in the back, near the kitchen, like a caterer who happened to wander in. And I've been asked to give a toast that was edited by a wedding planner, to make sure I didn't say anything too emotional or too real. Emma's face had gone pale. So here's my toast, the real one. Emma, I love you. I have always loved you. I will always love you. But today, I realize that love isn't always enough. Sometimes you raise a child, give them everything you have, and they still choose the people who gave them nothing. I hope you have a wonderful marriage. I hope Kevin makes you happy. But I won't stand here and pretend that this day isn't breaking my heart. I set down the microphone and walked out. I didn't run. I didn't slam any doors. I just walked, steadily and calmly, past the stunned guests, past the kitchen, past the valet station, to my old truck in the parking lot. I drove home, still wearing my navy suit, and sat on my porch until the sun came up. Emma didn't call that night, or the next day, or the day after that. A week later, I got a text. Not a call, a text. "Dad, that was really inappropriate. You embarrassed me in front of everyone. Kevin's family thinks you're unstable. I need some space." Space. I gave her space. I didn't call, didn't text, didn't reach out. If she needed time to see things clearly, I would give her all the time in the world. A month passed, then 2. I heard through Ray that Emma and Kevin had bought a house in Oakville. A big place, 4 bedrooms, nice neighborhood. I also heard that Derek had put up the down payment. Of course he did. Meanwhile, I was sitting alone in my house in Hamilton, the house I'd been planning to give Emma as a wedding gift, the house I'd spent 30 years paying for. I'd been holding on to it, thinking maybe after things settled down, I could sign it over to her, a peace offering, a reminder that some things can't be bought. But as the weeks went by, something shifted in me. I started to see things clearly. Maybe for the first time. I'd spent my whole life sacrificing for people who didn't appreciate it. First Christine, who left me for a richer man. Then Emma, who had chosen that same man's legacy over me. I'd been so focused on giving that I'd forgotten to ask whether the people I was giving to actually valued what I offered. The answer, it seemed, was no. So I made a decision. I called a realtor. The house sold in 3 weeks. Hamilton's market was hot, and a young couple offered me $680,000, well over asking. After paying off the remaining mortgage, I was left with almost $400,000. $400,000. A lifetime of work, converted to a number in a bank account. I thought about what to do with it. I could keep it, use it for retirement, travel a little, enjoy whatever years I had left. That would be the sensible thing. But I wasn't feeling sensible. I called the Canadian Firefighters Burn Fund, explained who I was, that I wanted to make a significant donation. The woman on the phone almost dropped the receiver when I told her the amount. "Sir, are you sure? That's an extraordinary gift." "I'm sure. I want it to go to kids, specifically, kids who've been burned in fires, who need surgeries, rehabilitation, support, kids who need someone to show up for them." We set up the donation. I stipulated that it would fund a new program called the Rebecca Mitchell Memorial Fund, named after a little girl we'd lost in a house fire back in 2003. I'd never forgotten her. She was 7 years old, same age as Emma at the time. We couldn't save her. Her parents never recovered. The fund would help other families, other children, people who needed help and had no one to give it. The paperwork was signed 3 months after Emma's wedding. I moved out of the house and into a small apartment near Gage Park. It was modest, but it was enough. I had my pension, my memories, and for the first time in decades, a sense of peace. 6 months after the wedding, I got a call from an unknown number. "Dad?" It was Emma. Her voice sounded different, smaller. "Emma, Dad, She paused. "Can we talk?" I waited. Something happened. With Derek. I should have felt vindicated. I didn't. I just felt tired. What happened? It came out in a rush. Derek's company had been under investigation for securities fraud. The RCMP had raided his offices 2 months ago. His assets were frozen. He was facing criminal charges and up to 15 years in prison. Christine had filed for divorce immediately. Apparently her love had limits, and those limits were reached when the money disappeared. "She's staying with a friend in California," Emma said. "She won't even return my calls." "I'm sorry to hear that. Kevin and we're in trouble, Dad. Derek gave us the down payment for our house, but now the bank is calling it in. They're saying the money was proceeds of crime. We might lose everything." I closed my eyes. We went to Kevin's parents for help, but they're not wealthy. They can't cover a mortgage that size, and I don't know who else to turn to. "So you're calling me." "Dad, please. I know I messed up. I know the wedding was. I know I hurt you, but I'm your daughter, and I need help." There it was. The moment I'd imagined 100 times. My daughter, finally realizing that the man with the big promises and the bigger checkbook was a fraud, coming back to the father who had actually been there. "Emma, do you remember the house I grew up in? The one on the mountain?" "Of course. I lived there until I went to university. I was going to give you that house. As a wedding present. I'd been planning it for years. I thought, when you got married, I'd sign it over. Give you a real foundation for your new life." "Dad." Her voice was hopeful. "I sold it, Emma. 4 months ago." Silence. "What?" After the wedding, after everything that happened, I realized something. That house represented my whole life's work. 30 years of sacrifice, overtime, missed vacations, and I was going to give it to someone who sat me in the back row of her wedding and had another man walk her down the aisle. "Dad, I'm so sorry about that." I was confused. Derek and Mom had been filling my head with, I know they manipulated you. But Emma, you're not a child. You're a grown woman with a law degree. You knew what you were doing. You made a choice. I made a mistake. Yes, you did. More silence. What did you do with the money? From the house? I donated it. You donated it? All of it. Almost $400,000 to the firefighters' burn fund. It's helping kids now. Kids who've been injured in fires. Kids who need surgeries and therapy and support. I heard her breath catch. There's a little girl in Peterborough who's getting facial reconstruction surgery next month. Covered by the fund. A teenager in Thunder Bay who lost his hands. He's getting prosthetics that will let him play hockey again. A family in Windsor whose house burned down. They're getting help rebuilding. Dad, that's a lot of money. It is. And it's going to people who need it. People who don't have anyone else. But I need it. I'm your daughter. You are. And I love you. But love doesn't mean enabling. You chose to build your life on Derek's money, not mine. You chose his name at your wedding, his seat at your table, his arm to walk you down the aisle. Those choices have consequences. She was crying now. I didn't know he was a criminal. I thought he was successful. Emma, the warning signs were always there. A man who could buy your mother but couldn't be bothered to know you as a child. Who threw money at you when he wanted something but never once showed up when you actually needed help. That's not success. That's just greed with a nice suit. What am I supposed to do? You're a lawyer. You have a good education that I paid for, by the way. A real one, not bought with dirty money. You have skills. You'll figure it out. Will you help me? I am helping you. I'm telling you the truth. Something Derek and your mother never did. She was quiet for a long moment. Can I come see you? Not to ask for money. Just to talk? I thought about it. The anger was still there, buried under layers of exhaustion and grief. But underneath all of it, she was still my daughter. I'm at an apartment near Gage Park now. I'll text you the address. She came the next weekend. I barely recognized her at first. The polished, confident woman from the wedding was gone. In her place was someone who looked tired, uncertain, a little bit broken. She reminded me of the girl I used to carry on my shoulders through the Hamilton waterfront trail. We sat on my tiny balcony, drinking coffee, watching the park. Dad, I need to tell you something. I waited. After the wedding, after you left, Derek took me aside. He was furious. He said you were an embarrassment, that your little speech had made everyone uncomfortable. He said I needed to cut ties with you completely if I wanted to be part of their world. And you listened. I did. For a while. But then, she set down her coffee. I started to remember things I'd pushed away, like how you used to wake up at 4 a.m. to make my lunch because you had an early shift. How you'd read me the same bedtime story 50 times because I loved it. How you never once made me feel like a burden, even when I know I must have been. You were never a burden, Emma. I know that now. Derek made me feel like I was, like I owed him for everything he did, but he didn't do anything, did he? He just wrote checks. Writing a check isn't love. No, it isn't. I'm so sorry, Dad, for the wedding, for the seating chart, for the aisle, for all of it. I was so blinded by what I thought I wanted that I forgot what I already had. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and I saw myself in her eyes. The same stubbornness, the same pride, the same capacity for making mistakes and learning from them. I forgive you, Emma. She broke down then, really cried, the way she used to when she was little and the world felt too big. Thank you. I don't deserve it. Probably not. But I didn't raise you to deserve things. I raised you to earn them. And you're going to earn your way back. It won't be easy. I'm not going to bail you out financially. You and Kevin are going to have to figure that out yourselves. I know, but I'll be here. For coffee, for talks, for the hard stuff that actually matters. She reached over and took my hand. That's all I want, Dad. That's all I ever really needed. We sat there for a long time, father and daughter, watching the leaves turn colors in the park below. It's been 2 years since that day on the balcony. Emma and Kevin lost the house in Oakville. They couldn't keep up with the mortgage, and when Derek's assets were seized, the bank called in the loan. They moved to a small rental in Burlington, much more modest, much more real. Kevin lost his fancy job at the bank too. Turns out a lot of his connections came through Derek, and when Derek went down, those connections dried up. He works at a credit union now, makes about half what he used to. But he stuck with Emma through all of it, which told me something about his character that his Tesla never did. Emma took a job at a small firm in Hamilton. Family law, mostly. Divorces, custody battles, the messy stuff that big firms don't want to touch. She says it's humbling work, but meaningful. She gets to help people on the worst days of their lives. Derek got 12 years. I read about it in the paper. Securities fraud, money laundering, a whole litany of charges. Christine divorced him before the ink was dry on the verdict. Last I heard, she was trying to rebuild her image as a life coach in Los Angeles. Some people never learn, but Emma did. She comes to visit every week now. Sometimes Kevin joins her. We have dinner together, usually something I've cooked because they're still learning. She asks about the guys at Station 7, most of whom have retired by now. I tell her about my volunteer work with the burn survivors support group. Last month, she asked if she could see the Rebecca Mitchell Memorial Fund in action. I took her to a fundraiser in Toronto, where she met some of the kids the fund has helped. There was a little boy there, 8 years old, covered in scars from a house fire that took both his parents. He's getting therapy, surgeries, a chance at a normal life. Emma cried when she met him. Not sad tears. Something else. Pride, maybe. Gratitude. You gave up your house for this, she said afterward. I gave up a house, I corrected her. What I got back was more important. What's that? My daughter. She hugged me then, right there in the parking lot. And for the first time in years, it felt like we were back where we started. Not perfect, but real. Not rich, but whole. I'm 65 now. The pension keeps the lights on, and my apartment is warm in the winter. I don't have a house to leave behind, but I have something better. A legacy of service. A daughter who finally understands what matters. A fund that helps kids who need it most. At my daughter's wedding, she chose someone else to walk her down the aisle. She let a man who had done nothing take credit for everything. And when I walked out of that ceremony, I thought I'd lost her forever. But here's what I learned. Sometimes you have to let go of what you thought you wanted to find, what you actually need. Sometimes the people who hurt you the most are the ones who need to fall the farthest before they can climb back up. And sometimes, if you're patient, if you hold on to your dignity, even when everything falls apart, the people who left you will find their way home. My daughter found her way home. And that, in the end, was worth more than any house I could have given her. Thank you for watching. If this story touched you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear it.